Welcome to Noodling with Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. I am Tracy Winter, one of the co-founders of Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. I'm here with my other co-founder, Kate Arms. Say hi, Kate. And we together are here with Liv Blaney to answer some questions that she is bringing for us.
Hi there.
Hi, Liv.
So my name is Liv Blaney. I'm a executive mindset and neurodiversity coach. So my questions for you are a bit varied based on my experience. And the first question I have is, what are the top 3 things that you see people, coaches, bringing to supervision in terms of themes?
Let Kate take that. I'm more of a mentor than a supervisor. So Kate's our resident supervisor.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've actually been working with quite a lot of people with right now is actually, how do I talk about who I am as a coach and what I do? And so that's been a lot of self-discovery and who am I beyond the model that I use, and what is it that I do that is not, I just do this thing that I was trained to do. So that's super fun work, because that's actually figuring out their philosophies and their beliefs and who they are. And then there's another piece that I'm seeing quite a lot, which is this place of, I am understanding how my brain is working, and I have this set of habits that I've been using because I think I need them to be effective, but they're getting in the way of my doing something. I'm not quite sure where, but they're getting in the way. So how can I actually loosen up on some of my coping mechanisms to be more present with my clients? It turns out that be more present with my clients is what it is that they're trying to do. And you asked for 3, but really those are the 2 that I'm seeing really a lot of. The one that also sort of is usually in the background is, I just want to make sure I'm being as helpful as I can be. And like, just that self-check about, am I projecting on them? Am I giving too much of advice? Am I somehow not being what I could be?
I think one of the things that you say there makes me reflect on some of the training, not from you guys actually, but from other places in the industry, where I guess I'm a classically trained ICF coach, and with that I believe that the most part of my job is to elicit kind of empowerment from my clients and help them make choices and help them bring that to the fore. I see some coach training leads more towards the giving advice approach, and I'm also conscious that neurodiversity coaching is a slightly different beast in some cases to kind of classic ICF coaching. And I'm kind of, I guess where I'm getting to is, I'm kind of curious as to where you see neurodiversity coaching on the scale of non-directive to slightly more directive.
So I come from an ICF perspective too. I was trained in an ICF program. ICF is International Coaching Federation, for people who might not know that. And I teach in an ICF accredited program as well. I teach new ADHD coaches. So I'm coming from a similar perspective. And so I'm very much on the low advice giving. Possibly even more so for my neurodivergent clients, or when I'm actively being neurodiversity inclusive, which hopefully is all the time. Because here's the thing. There's a couple different angles. So one of the things I say to people in my discovery calls is like, you've known you for 62 years. I've known you for 24 minutes. Who's more likely to have the solution for you, right? Like the idea that I would have advice that you couldn't have Googled, right? No, we need to co-create something that is unique to you. And I think this is particularly true for folks who are neurodivergent, because their brains we all have unique brains. And also, you know, folks who have some neurodiversity in them, who are neurodivergent, their brains are more different from everybody else and more different from each other, right? So they may need a solution that only works for them and nobody else on the planet. And so we need to co-create that. Another piece of it is that a lot of my clients have been given a lot of advice over the years, a lot of advice from the time they were small, because they get these reflections of you're not doing it right. You're not being it right even. And so they try to do it the ways that everybody tells them to do it, and it hasn't worked and hasn't worked and hasn't worked. That's because the ways that everybody else does it are not the ways that flow with their natural brain style, right? So the last thing I want to do is add to the advice pile that they've already gotten, right? I want to be helping them with a different experience where I'm not telling you what to do. Like, you have agency, you're an incredible problem solver, because neurodivergent folks have been problem solving since before they knew where they were doing it, just to get on in this world that's not made for us. So like, yeah, I'm not here to know any better than you. Now, that doesn't mean that I will withhold something if it comes to me. Like, if we're brainstorming an idea and I go, can I just share this idea is coming to my head. Can I share it and see what it sparks for you? Yes. Say the thing, say what does that spark for you? Or sometimes I'll say, I have this idea, it's stuck in my head. Can I just say it? And then you can tell me why it won't work, and then we can move on. And they go, sure. And I'm okay. And then sometimes it sparks something instead of actually being something to throw out. So it's not advice, but it's contributing to the co-creation in that way. But I am very undirective, sometimes to the chagrin of clients who were listening that well in the discovery call and think I'm going to give them answers. Kate, what's your version?
I mean, I land very much in the same place. I similarly have some pretty deep ICF training. One of the things that one of my trainers, mentors, teachers in the coactive training program said at some point was, one of the skills that is a coaching skill is educating the client. And the educating the client as a coaching skill is, if there's some information about how brains work or how patterns show up or things that typically occur when there's resistance to change and that sort of thing, that to say, here's a bit of a framework in a coach setting is to say, can I share something with you that might be useful? Get permission. If permission is granted, which it usually is, because usually our clients, when they're stuck, are desperate for anything that will help, including information sometimes. Especially if we hold it back most of the time and just offer it at the points where it really feels like it would be doing a disservice to be holding it back. To say, firstly, ask for permission, then share the thing as simply as possible with as little detail as possible. And then say, is this useful? Is there something here that seems to offer you something? And to be as not attached to the thing being useful as to any other coaching question landing well. To just be like, I'll drop it in if it's useful, pick it up and run with it, pick it up and walk with it. But like, let's not trip over it. If it's going to be in the way, we're going to just set it aside. And so that's part of what's in there for me. And sometimes, because of the experience that I have, there's stuff that is actually useful. And sometimes it's really, really valuable to hold back on sharing that as long as possible. Yeah.
What do you think, Liv?
So I agree with both of you, actually, in terms of what I have experienced is that people really like finding their own answers, even if that isn't what they thought they wanted in the first place. So often people will come and say, oh, I really want some advice. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's see how we go with that. But then you get to the end of the session and they're like, I didn't realize I had my own answers in there. And you're like, actually, that's what I want you to come away with. It's not that, you should go and meditate as a piece of advice. Not that I think I've ever given that as advice, but it's actually what I want them to come away with is a feeling that they can find ways forwards, because I don't need to be the crutch that they lean on, or I need to be there to help change the way in which they think about things and feel more empowered. But then I need to be able to let them go, and they need to be able to let me go. And so they don't need to be coming back to me for advice because they realize they can do it themselves.
Yeah. I love the piece of, I've got advice and I will be happy to give it to you later.
Yep.
If you still want it after we sort of dug in to make sure that we know what you already know about this, so that what I'm giving, and then that, like, because then I can say, like, so I'm not wasting your time with things that aren't actually going to be useful. Like, there are all sorts of things if they're really pushing for advice that we can throw in there. And I had a coaching session just this week where it's something that I teach, so I have expertise, and I think it's something that my client knows that I teach. And so there was this sort of piece of like, I'm stuck in this place. And I like, what do you know? What do you already know? What do you believe? What are your philosophies? What are your principles? What's your understanding? Putting all of my theory like way back behind me. And at some point they got to a point where they were like, and there's this place where I just don't know anything. And then I was like, so I've got something I can offer you for this place. Would you like it? And they were ecstatic. And that's the way I like to try and play in this space, is go as far as possible without giving advice. And sometimes that's a long way. And so sometimes you can go a long way. And to the person who was asking for advice, you can say, look how far you already have this. And that's such a lovely moment, right?
It's that kind of perpetual what else, right? What else have you got? You've probably got something else. Come on, you've still got something else. What else? What else? It's that kind
and
of...
at some point they're like, no, I have nothing. And you're like, okay, I believe you.
Liv, I like what you said about not becoming the person's crutch. And what we're doing is changing sort of the way they think about things. It's really interesting timing, because literally like less than an hour ago, I received a testimonial from someone who finished her coaching, I don't know, last summer. And one of the things she said was, like, what I learned in coaching is how to think about my problems and how to, you know, come up against the challenges and what questions to ask myself so that I can create my solutions. Like, and it's harder work, and also it's totally worth it, because now I can do this, like, literally within the last hour. And I was like,
and you know, when I reflect, that is why I love coaching. That's what actually got me addicted to coaching, is the fact that I found my brain rewiring to solve my problems, and that's what I would like to bring to others. So that's kind of, yeah. Anyway, and I guess just related to that testimonial, or I'm guessing another client, is there one client or situation that's stayed with you over the years? Feel free to anonymize details, but when you think about your coaching proudest achievements, is there one situation that sticks with you?
What a great question. I've got two that really sort of are huge, like, this is what the magic of coaching is kinds of things. And one is actually someone who I've been coaching for a very long time, and who has a lot of areas that when they came to me, they weren't willing to look at all. And for the time that we've been coaching, the process is they come to me and they get coaching on the thing they're willing to look at, and then they go away. And at some point, months later, they come back with the next thing they're willing to look at. And it's just such a wonderful demonstration of, you open the door, you learn the things, and then the clients go off and they can do more. And then they hit a wall, but they know that you're someone they can come back to. And I just love that piece of, it doesn't have to be once and done. It doesn't have to be all the time for long periods of time. It can be dip at the place that you're stuck and then leave. And then the other one that comes to me in this is that there was an absolutely wonderful woman who came to me unbelievably stuck, unbelievably convinced that there was no way through this, that this was completely overwhelming. And I think I coached her for 3 months. And then it was like, boom, flip, gone. like, I haven't heard from her since. I follow her on social media and I can see just she's gone, like up and away, and has never had a need for me again. And I'm like, also awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got two stuck in my brain too. So sorry, Liv, we're taking the left turn of like, no, we're not answering that question. We're going to answer a slightly different question, which is, you know, how neurodiversity inclusive is that? What and I wouldn't say I'm proud of what I did so much as the client was so proud of themselves that like I felt so gratified and like just satisfied with the experience, right? And one of them was a man who worked for a computer company as a techie, really good at his job, very bright, but also creative and wanted to be doing more in the creative space, making skits, recording them, you know, and incorporating them into his work. But he just kept getting stuck in the minutia, and everybody would come to him with the questions, and so he didn't get to the thing that he really wanted to do. And so like, we started out, you know, he came up with small things like, well, I'm going to go work at the coffee shop for 2 hours. And, you know, I'm going to leave this at home. I'm just going to take my notebook and my pencil, like, you know, that kind of thing. And it was great. By the time we got to the end of our coaching engagement, he had torn apart his whole office, his home office, taken it, put everything out, repainted, redesigned it so that he could be sitting at his desk from any of the 4 sort of, you know, square sides. That's the word. Any of the 4 sides, and he would have a different way of seeing the room. So like if he was doing his computery work, he would sit on one side. If he was doing creative work, he would sit on another side. There was an armchair that wasn't there before with a light and a plant, which I will say he named Tracy, which made me so happy. And he talks to the plant now, like, right? But like that level of transformation and engagement with himself to get there. And his ideas were just flowing like crazy. So that was a great one. And then I coached a young man, junior in high school, which I don't do very often. I do when they're twice exceptional, very bright, pretty self-aware, just like good kid, you know. And we would do the coaching thing. He would come up with the solutions. He would go away. He would try them. He would come back. Usually they worked, or we tweak, or you know, do the thing. But my favorite thing, and he did great. And my favorite thing was the last session, he said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to talk about what are the questions that you usually ask me, because I want to make sure that I have them so I can keep asking them of myself. And I was like, well, first of all, you're already doing it. But second of all, okay, let's do that. You know, and so like that level of awareness was just wonderful to see. And how fun to be doing it with a 16-year-old, which means that he's going to be taking this with him. And the rest of his life will be a little bit easier, I hope, because he has these skills and he has these tools. So those are my 2 that stick in my heart.
It's lovely how clients stick around in your heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
I am curious about how you see neurodiversity coaching changing. And I guess as the context of the question, when you look back 20 years ago, things were very different. And I'm interested how you see things going in the next 10 to 15. I know that's a big question.
Let's do it. Yeah, well, I mean, like, it was only about 25 years ago that the term neurodiversity was coined, right? Mm-hmm. So 15 or 20 years ago was a whole different ballgame. I mean, it wasn't until, I believe this is true, because the DSM-5 came around, which is just within the last decade or a little bit more, that you could be diagnosed with ADHD and autism at the same time. Like that wasn't a thing before. So yeah, like the landscape is changing so rapidly. And, you know, even 3 years ago, if you said the word neurodiversity, there were a lot more people who said, what's neurodiversity? Than there are now, although there are, you know, it's still not mainstream, even though those of us in the bubble kind of forget that sometimes. And by that, I mean, I think there's more awareness. I think there's more inclusivity is more of a thing in general, not just in neurodiversity, but in multiple areas, that is sort of continues to rise. I'm really crummy at where's it going or where will it be in 15 years. The first thing that came to my mind was what's AI going to do to coaching and what's AI going to do to neurodiversity-inclusive coaching. And I don't have enough knowledge or awareness of that to speak to it, but that was the first thing that came to my mind, was like, how is that going to shift this landscape? Coaching in general and neurodiversity-inclusive coaching. And how can we make the AI neurodiversity inclusive when right now coaching in general is not neurodiversity inclusive for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Small pockets. So that's what I got so far. Kate, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much in the question. So starting sort of historically, I think that what we've seen with the neurodiversity paradigm movement has been this move towards a more nuanced understanding of the complexity of neurodivergence, a real understanding of the range of this can make some things easier and this makes things harder. The sheer breadth of just autism as an example, just thinking of the way that the understanding of autism has shifted from severely debilitating being the only image that people have of autism to now we've got an advocacy movement that is accused of forgetting about them because it's so like autism is a superpower kind of piece. And there's still a substantial percentage of autistic people who are nonverbal, and that range is enormous. And so there's become this bigger sense of you really have to meet people where they're at, and the complete range within the population of people who need neurodiversity inclusive practices. At the other side, I think that there's become a real sense in the coaching world that coaching can have a role in helping people suffer less and not just being about taking people from good to great. And then the other piece is that there's been this sort of piece about employee performance coaching that is about like making you be better at doing the thing that you're supposed to do, which is right in the sort of masking space. So there's a really complicated conversation in there about what is the role of performance coaching in all of this, both in terms of getting the high performance out of the high performers, but also the low performers, sort of what is actually going on there. And so I think we've seen a trend of complexity and these worlds sort of coming together in coaching, which I think is great. It actually makes what Tracy and I are trying to do with the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy more important, because we're actually coming from a place of how do you coach in a way that actually makes your coaching accessible to all of those people and to all of those needs, so that coaches who have that lens realize we're all playing the same game with different people. And I think that this is where the future and the relationship with AI can be really, really interesting, because AI can be, if we want to use it, can be really customizable and can be really supportive of specific needs and specific pieces. And then the other thing that's coming is one of the patterns that's underneath all of it that people are starting to realize is the importance of somatic regulation and the importance of actually all of this goes through the body. And AI is not competing with us on a somatic level yet. And so I think that there's going to be a need for coaches to get more wisdom around working with the human body, because that's the place where we're going to not be caught out by the AI earliest. I'm not willing to predict that AI won't get there.
Something
I think it's
something for me a little bit back, not in the AI. But when I did my training, which was like 2008, 2009, right? So about 10 years into the neurodiversity paradigm, and also nobody knew the word neurodiversity. The line in coaching between this is therapy and this is coaching was really like a good bold double yellow in the United States line. Like you don't cross it. And I remember questioning it then because I was already in the ADHD world going, and a lot of them, you know, a lot of ADHDers, a lot of neurodivergent people have co-occurring conditions of depression and anxiety, because why wouldn't you if you live in a world that isn't made for you, right? And so I think, like, I don't know what it is in the coaching world as a whole, but I think that has evolved over time, and certainly in the neurodiversity inclusive spaces, that's evolved over time and become more nuanced, right? And more, which means coaches also have to become more nuanced in their understanding of all of that, which is one of the things that we try to help with. So I think that, like, I'm not sure where that's going to go too, but that's been an interesting sort of evolution in the last 15 or so years. But I like what Kate was saying about the somatic piece, which also tells me I really got to get that somatic piece going in my coaching.
I think that the thing that struck me is the piece that you said around customization. So when I think about, and when I think about kind of the way in which typical neurotypical coaching goes, there is a way of doing things that is typically done, but we don't ask all the questions, right? So, you know, we make assumptions about how people would like to communicate, as an example, or what might work for them. And actually, the way that I perceive neurodiversity coaching is that actually you're making it just way more customized to the individual that you have in front of you, rather than making all of the assumptions that you make about perhaps a neurotypical coachee, or that you can make about a neurotypical coachee, which makes it more interesting, more complicated, a bit more gnarly. Yeah.
But also more fun.
But also, sorry,
like,
yes.
For me anyway, like that's more fun,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like that means there's more to
Yeah.
discover. That means my curiosity gets to go in cooler places more of the time. So yes, it's all of those things. And also like, neat, what is this human like that is unlike everybody else? Like that's part of the fun part, I think, of our job.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think one of the things that was really, really challenging for me in 2020 was that all of a sudden everybody became comfortable on video, which meant that people remotely started thinking of video as the default remote communication. And I had had a coaching practice that was primarily phone-based for years at that point. I was actually coaching over Skype before Zoom was a thing. So I was doing improvisational dance-based coaching over Skype in like 2015. So like I was an early adopter of video, and still most of my coaching was on the phone. And I've actually had to work with some of my clients who came to coaching after 2020 to even sort of consider that maybe we could do remote coaching in ways that weren't video, because video doesn't work for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's asking some of those questions that isn't the default. It's the, do you want your camera off? Do you want to, or do you not even want to have the camera available? Like, how do you, like, it's asking the questions that we don't automatically ask.
Yeah, like, why don't we try going for a walk today?
Yeah.
Or I'm going to go sit on my balcony. And that's a different perspective. And let's see what that does to my brain.
Yeah.
You know, all kinds of different possibilities, which always goes back to, like you were saying, ask the client, right?
Yeah.
And leave those possibilities, which sometimes our clients are so used to adapting to what the assumptions are. Like when you offer them that, it's like a whole window of sunshine opening up. Really? We could do that. Yeah, we can do whatever you want.
And sometimes that is terrifying, because sometimes people haven't been given enough permission to actually discover what it is that they want.
Well, and I think there's at least from my experience, there are some challenges with choosing. So most of the time people love choice, right? They love having optionality. They love not being told what to do, like we were saying earlier. But sometimes having choice particularly if it's open-ended choice, can be very difficult. And so, yeah, that again goes back to what does the client want? Because saying, even for example, what topic do you want to talk about today? It just too much. So then it goes back to knowing the client and knowing whether or not that's a question that's going to be a bit too much for them.
I think there's a skill to also to taking, because I still like open-ended question, going back to your original question, or one of the early questions about direction. If you're asking closed-ended questions, there's more of a chance that you're being directed, even accidentally. So you still want to ask open-ended questions, but I think there's a skill around asking sort of bounded open-ended questions. So they're not this big, they're this big, and that's like doable, right? And figuring out sort of like, where is that space for your client?
Yeah. There's I'm sure you've seen it before. There's what I call the blob tree, but it's that your face says you haven't seen it before.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I need you to describe it to be sure.
I'll send it over. It's so basically it's pictures of gender neutral like people in different poses around a tree. And so the question to the client is, which one of these blobs, these people, these characters represents you at this point in time? And so there's a blob that's sitting by itself on the end of a branch. There's a blob that is hanging itself. There's a blob that's working with a team. There's a blob that's like clawing up the tree. There's a blob that's sliding down the tree. So it's all of these different options. And so rather than saying, how are you, or what do you want to talk about, or whatever your opener might be, it's actually which one of these 20 different characters most represents you. Okay, so tell me about that, and then you go in that way.
This is brand new to me. This is amazing.
This is one of my favorite tools for team retrospectives.
Okay, you're keeping things from me.
Well, I'm sorry, I have a lot of things. I can't actually throw them all out all at once.
Thank you, Liv, for sharing this cool resource. I appreciate you.
It's not very sophisticated, but it is very useful.
That's really cool. I love it.
It's wonderful because people put themselves as one of these characters based on their assumptions about how they're reading the characters, but the characters are actually sufficiently ambiguous that in order for it to be meaningful, you have to say why. What does that mean to you? What are you trying, what is it about that character that speaks to you and how you are? And so it's a lovely, gentle way into checking in with yourself in a way that doesn't require vocabulary, which is one of the things that is so powerful, because the part of our body that experiences the wholeness of our somatic experience is not the part that has access to language. And so when we go to an emotions wheel and we go to language, we quite often take people out of their body and out of the experience we're trying to get them to name. And the blob eliminates all of that. I love it. Yeah.
Tracy, I can't wait. I'm like, where am I facilitating a group soon that I could be using this? I want to try it out now.
So one question that I have is, I've had other coaches come to me who haven't spent a lot of time with neurodivergent clients, but they've had, particularly where they're doing work via one of the platforms, right? So they don't have the choice of client. The client is kind of put in their calendar, and the clients will sometimes turn up and then tell them that they're neurodivergent. Now, I know that there are a lot of coaches that are worried about how their coaching might need to adapt to neurodiversity. And I guess if there was one thing that you would tell those coaches for those moments where someone turns up and then tells them that they're neurodivergent, what would you say?
Tracy, do you want to go first?
I was just going to ask you that. I think we kind of already talked about it a little bit. As much as you can, question your assumptions, and all of them, going in, treat this person as if this is gonna sound weird, and I've never said this before, but like, treat this person like they're an alien, you don't know anything about them. Start from go, right? Don't assume there are common things about humanity necessarily when you're going in to coach somebody. Like, okay, so what is this person about? How do they see things? What is their perspective? You can't assume that we have typical experiences in the world, right? So sort of whatever you usually do, don't, or at least start out, don't. And like, start from like zero. You have nothing, you have no idea about this person except maybe their name, maybe their job title on a platform. I don't know. So like the neurodiversity, like not just that they're neurodivergent, but to be neurodiversity inclusive, that's where you start from as much as possible. It's not assuming you know. Like the assumption needs to be, I don't know. I
It's a
don't know.
blank sheet.
Pardon me?
The blank sheets.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's
my
eventually where
opinion.
I would go, is I would go, okay, so someone says they're neurodivergent, they come in, they say they've got this identity, this label, however they work with it, because if someone just comes in and says, you know, I have ADHD versus, you know, I'm an ADHDer, those of us who are in the space are making assumptions about the differences between the way those two people think about their ADHD, right? Like I see the nods, right? Like we are making assumptions right now about where the people who use the language that way are. And we have to step back and not let our knowledge do that. You know, it's coaching 101 taken to extremes. If you ask someone, so how do you feel about that? And they say good, the coaching skill is to say, what does good mean to you? And here, like, I have ADHD. Great. What does ADHD mean to you? What do you know about your brain? What would it be useful for me to know to be able to help you, given your understanding of your ADHD? Right, like that. And once again, like use the client's language. This is just another opportunity to use the client's language and get curious about what it means to them. And we help clients make distinctions about language that doesn't have this loaded emotional piece. We can help our clients make distinctions about, is this a liability? Is this a gift? Where does this serve you? Where is this a problem? How does holding this as an identity rather than as a description of functionality change how you relate to it? We can ask all of those questions. And those are just good questions. If someone came in and said, I'm new, and I would be like, okay, so what does it mean to you? Because I don't know anything about it. Right? And they'll be able to tell me.
Well, and that goes back to, it's good coaching. It's good coaching 101, right? Because we ask, like, one of the things about coaching that we talk about is, well, I talk about with my students is, you can't assume, like, just because there are some common understandings of like what this word means, this collection of sounds and this collection of like curves and straight lines, it's an inexact thing. So like he said, like, we're asking about it anyway, more of that, right?
Yeah. You know, that question about like, okay, so you're here, you want to get better at this job. What do you see as the gap and where you're doing in your gap? And how does being impact the gap? Like,
What does better mean?
I need to
right?
understand it. I just need to know how you see it impacting.
Yeah.
What was I going to ask? What's the okay, sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. So when you one of the things that that comes up a lot is that neurodivergent individuals are more likely to have suffered some kind of trauma in their lives than neurotypical, and that goes from school age onwards. And I guess my question is, again, going back to kind of, I believe that actually if you put the right contracting in place, then actually a lot of the time coaching can provide a safe enough space to be able to hold that in the right way. I'm curious as to whether or not there is anything else that you might do to help adapt to that.
You want to take the first stab at this one?
Yeah. So I would say there are two pieces. and the contracting and continual recontracting and being open to recontracting, particularly as people get more aware of themselves and as they change through the coaching process, that willingness to recontract is really, really crucial. The habit of asking for permission to sort of go in different directions is really, really powerful. The habit of, so I've seen a couple of things that are threads that I could pull on with my questions. Is there one you want to go to? Like giving that kind of option. Sometimes actually the open-ended question that is, where from here? What now? That one can actually give, it's an implied permission to lead it where you want to. And so that's part of, most bodies won't take themselves to the trauma if they're not ready to deal with them. And so mostly that can really help. So that's part of sort of sophisticated, nuanced, ongoing contracting. And then the other piece is a somatic understanding of what dysregulation looks like, that awareness of tension, physiology, the way that skin goes pale when a withdrawal response happens, the nuances of pitches, either sort of dropping well into the chest or really going into a high range, are very often sort of signs that something pretty dramatic is happening in terms of the relationship with the body. I think that somatic experience is really, really powerful. And I would say the biggest thing is, if you are scared of going to the hard places, you have to do work on yourself as a coach. That's the most important thing, is like, if those uncomfortable emotions, you need to be comfortable with them. Grief, shame, sadness, anger, rage. You need to find a way to be okay with being in the room with them.
So you remind me, the other day on LinkedIn, actually, very unusual for LinkedIn, there was a LinkedIn storm about effectively about the dysregulation of neurodiversity coaching, about how people feel like people do a 6-week course and then attach a label of coach and kind of go, and now I'm fully trained, right? And what you're talking about there is nuanced and complicated and requires self-work and all the rest of it. And I guess, and I haven't fully formed my thoughts in my head, but there's this kind of, in order to become a coach, you need to do all that work. You need to do all that work with real life clients. But at the same time, if you have clients that are in difficult spaces or perhaps more vulnerable than others, then it's actually a quite difficult work to get into. So there's this kind of double-edged sword, that you need the experience, but equally you could do some real harm by not having had that experience. And I guess I'll leave that there, because I'm not really sure what my question was, but it's more of a point. Like, I guess it's a difficult space to get into and get into well.
I hear the chicken egg issue there, right?
That's it. That's the summary. Yeah.
There are different levels of all of that, right? So being aware of where your range is and where your range at the moment, where the boundaries of that are, like, how comfortable am I? It's not, am I comfortable? Am I not comfortable, right? It's, where am I on this range? This continuum of like being comfortable. Okay, so that's how I'm going to be with this client. So like, yeah, coaches earlier in their career aren't necessarily going to the darkest, scariest corners with their client. And that's probably a good thing for both of them if they're not ready to be there, right? So I think it comes back and back and back to doing the work on yourself. So that means not just like being reflective, but it means coaching supervision. Hey, I've got this happened. This is what came up for me. I'm not really sure what to do about that, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that opens up coaching range. Watching demos, listening to demos, coming to Neurodiversity Coaching Academy classes, for instance.
Good plug. I like
Might
it.
be helpful. Understand some of the nuances or one of our specialization programs that are coming. Right, like, so it's the continual work and the continual learning you start out in the shallow end, right? And you gradually move into the deep end. And what I find from the beginning coaches that I work with is they don't have necessarily, they don't have the questions to ask that would get into a trouble place necessarily. They can still do it, don't get me wrong. Like, you can still do harm, like you're saying. And also, they're kind of worried about other things. I think as we evolve as coaches and we get more into sort of like the nuance and evoking awareness and like, what does that look like and how can we be in this and where are the different growing edges, and like, like our awareness grows. I think that the key thing is you just never stop trying to become more aware and trying to grow more and like that. I mean, like one of our folks who comes to our classes, who also is an ICF Austin coach, which is where I am, is in her 80s and like is annoyed that when they named the different coaching levels, she was part of the people who allowed it to be named Master Certified Coach. And she's like, we should never name it Mastery because that implies that there's a done and there's not a done. Part of being a master is that you're continuing to learn. And she's continuing to learn. Like she comes to classes, she goes to everything she can possibly go to, right? That's the kind of coach that I want to be in order to not hit up against the wall you're talking about. I think I went off top.
No, I don't think you did. I want to go and answer the question from a slightly different angle, which I think, which actually comes directly from my early coach training, which is early in your career as a coach, you are really going to attract the people who are just a hair behind you. Like the more experienced you get, the more you can help people who are further behind you. But early on, the people who are just a hair behind you are the people that you are most successful coaching. And the people who are most interested in coaching with you as clients are the people who are just a little bit behind you. And then they bring you your stuff. And so we have, right? So, because your clients bring you your stuff. And so and you realize you're like, okay, this is the thing I have to work on in order to be able to help them. So then you go and work on it. And so there's a place of which that's true no matter where you are. So if you are an autistic coach who has sort of embraced autism as part of who you are, and like, I am an autistic adult coaching, and I have sort of got this much life design stuff under control. And so I'm coaching. And then you get some clients who need that. They need to like accept themselves and like, this is okay. And I can actually take control of my life and make choices and design my life to work for me in this. And then you get the client who's autistic and ADHD and has aphantasia, and they challenge you. And you're like, okay, I have to grow. What do I need to do now? And it's very similar to a neurotypical client who gets their first client with ADHD. And it's like, this stuff I'm doing isn't working. I have to grow. And so there's an element of, if we trust that coach match moment is a decision point for the client and the coach, where the client says, I think you can help me. And the coach says, I think I can help you. And I think I can coach you even more. Like, I think I can be your coach. I think that actually, if we lean into that and trust that and remind coaches that saying yes to a client that you're not confident about means you need to go and get help if you're going to be effective, that's part of what we do. And so if we say, if you don't feel like this is the client for you, refer them to someone who you think might be, that actually by itself as a process reduces the likelihood of harm quite drastically.
So it comes back to the basics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've been saying the whole time, right? Yeah, I think Kate, you make a good point in that it's not just the coach's side. The client picks their coach, right? They're gonna, like, what my experience is the clients know, whether what's going on. they might not be able to articulate it, but they know who they need. So you're just out there being you and being what you can be. The clients that are for you find you.
Yeah, like the people who aren't really willing to be challenged, they're going to have one conversation with me and be like, I do not want to work with that woman at all.
Yeah, I've had those conversations.
Right? And I'm just like, okay, go find someone who's not going to stretch you quite so much right now. You know, I'll be here later.
Exactly. So Liv, we're coming up on the end of our time together. I want to make sure there's what's left on the table that we haven't talked to that you would like to make sure we hit on.
I think I'm good. To be honest, I had a lot of questions coming in, so we could be here until like midnight. So like, it's all good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us and for preparing all these questions and these great questions and making us think and just, you know, the work and the effort that you put in to come in here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for your answers.
And if you would like to learn more about Liv, we will have some links and things in the under the YouTube in the little caption thingamajiggy. So check there and you can get to know her a little bit better.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.